Welcome to this Quick Take Rapid Learning module. Today's topic, how confirmation bias skews your judgment of who will buy. Qualifying prospects is an imperfect science. You can never predict with 100% accuracy whether a prospect will end up buying from you or wasting your time. But if you can do a better job of sifting out the duds while keeping the keepers, the impact on your close rates and deal size can be profound. In this quick take, you will learn the mental pitfall that can blind your judgment about whether a prospect is qualified, why traditional qualifying methodologies like BANT or ANAM may not help you avoid this pitfall, and a new way to apply these methodologies that can improve the accuracy of your qualifying efforts. Every salesperson is trained to ask qualifying questions to sift out real buyers from time wasters. These questioning techniques go by various acronyms. The two most common are BANT, establishing that the prospect has budget, authority, need, and timing, and ANAM for authority, need, urgency, and money. But even the best salespeople sometimes follow these models and then realize, after going through an entire sales cycle, that the prospect wasn't qualified. And on the flip side, salespeople sometimes move too quickly to disqualify prospects who could have led to a big sale. The problem? While these models provide the right questions, they can't help you assess the candor or accuracy of the answers. That's determined by your subjective judgment. And that's where it gets tricky, because all of us are vulnerable to a psychological phenomenon known as confirmation bias. To see how confirmation bias works and how to counter its negative effects, let's look at an experiment involving doctors making a diagnosis. The task is similar to qualifying, where, as a salesperson, you're trying to gather information and diagnose whether a prospect is likely to buy or not. Researchers asked 75 psychiatrists to make a diagnosis based on a medical workup that the researchers had prepared. The researchers looked at how the doctors worked through the process and which ones came up with the most accurate diagnosis. The psychiatrists all started with a tentative diagnosis, but they approached the process in 3 different ways. Some looked for evidence to confirm the diagnosis. Others looked for information that would contradict it. And some took a balanced approach, looking equally for confirmation and disconfirmation. The first group, those who looked for confirming evidence, came up with the right diagnosis only 30% of the time. As you might expect, the ones who took a balanced approach did better. They were right 53% of the time. But the ones who looked for disconfirming evidence did the best by far. They were right 73% of the time. You can see the obvious connection with sales. In most cases, because of the way our brains work, we consciously or unconsciously form a tentative diagnosis early in a sales call. For example, this prospect is very likely to buy, or this prospect probably won't buy. And as with the doctors, there's a real danger we'll give more weight to evidence that confirms the initial hypothesis and less weight to evidence that contradicts it. Consider this example. A prospect says, "Yes, I have budget." This confirms the salesperson's hypothesis that this project is qualified, and it makes her feel good because she knows this is a big account that could increase her pipelines. So she checks yes for budget too quickly and moves to the next question. 2 months and a lot of activity later, she realizes there never was a budget after all. Confirmation bias works the other way too. A prospect tells a salesperson she's not the final decision maker. That confirms the salesperson's tentative hypothesis that the prospect won't buy, and he disqualifies her. But if he'd looked for disconfirming evidence, he might have discovered that the prospect was in fact a powerful influencer, and that this was an account worth pursuing. So what does this research tell us about qualifying? First, you can't eliminate confirmation bias. Just like the doctors, you'll always have a tentative diagnosis. And your natural tendency will be to give more weight to evidence that supports the diagnosis and discount evidence that contradicts it. Second, confirmation bias is an equal opportunity bias. Sometimes you'll be too optimistic about a prospect, sometimes too pessimistic. And third, the key is to offset the bias by actively looking for information that disconfirms your tentative hypothesis. So let's go back to our earlier examples. In the first example, the salesperson's asked, "Do you have a budget?" And the prospect said, "Yes." This confirmed the salesperson's tentative hypothesis that the prospect was qualified as she moved on. Instead, she should have tried to disconfirm her bias by asking, "How big is the budget? When was it allocated? And is there a deadline for spending it? Is it dedicated entirely to this project? What's the approval process for the budget?" In the second example, the salesperson heard the prospect was not the final decision maker. This confirmed his tentative hypothesis that the prospect was not qualified, and then he ended the sales call. Instead, he should have tried to disconfirm his bias by asking, "Could you describe your role in the decision process? Sounds like you have significant influence. Who is the decision maker, and based on past experiences, what generally happens when you make a recommendation to that person?" It's common for decision makers to push back. What tough questions do you anticipate, and how might you respond? You get the idea. The point is that when qualifying a prospect, avoid the temptation to hear what you want to hear, or more accurately, what you expect to hear. Understand what biases you're bringing to the conversation, and work hard to offset them with deep, probing questions. Sometimes your probing will confirm your initial hypothesis. Sometimes it'll disconfirm it. Either way, you'll get to the truth more quickly, which will save you time on unqualified prospects and help you avoid walking away too quickly from a qualified prospect. Thanks for watching. Now return to the program page and take the quiz. Also, please take 15 seconds to click on the survey link and fill out an evaluation of this program.